Hello, my name is Tony. Whatever I've done in life to deserve this, it must have been pretty bad. I have dim recollections of this film the first time around, the most striking one being it was rather atrocious. And back then I was much younger and way more forgiving, believe me. Must have been a rotter though, because I never revisited it, not once, until now. I clearly buried the experience in the depths of my subconscious, but it has now resurfaced with a vengeance. I'm so suggestible, someone mentioned something and I think, yeah, I should review that, what a good idea. I need to get a grip, man. What's that saying, misery loves company? I'm gonna test it out by sharing the horror with you. I don't mind drinking alone, in fact I prefer it. Given the chance I think I'd enjoy living alone, shit yeah. But wretchedness is something I like to be sociable with. So if you've got access to antidepressant medication, I suggest you double up the dosage before we get started. Before I immerse you in the jaw-dropping world of Hawk the Slayer. Before we go any further, I'd like to take the opportunity to remind you of the importance of subscribing in order to maintain the continued growth, health and welfare of the channel. Even more important, if you're able to do so, is to hit the thanks button and make a very welcome contribution to keeping this channel up and running and promoting the production of new content. Many thanks, much appreciated. Now back to our main feature. Before we flip into the fantasy realm of Hawk though, allow me to lay the groundwork with some real world considerations. The budget was a mere £600,000. Now, although this was 1980, that's still a pitiful and paltry amount of money to spend on a mainstream movie, around 2.3 million quid adjusted for inflation. Humanoids from the Deep the same year cost $2.5 million. The Shining and Xanadu 20 million apiece. Hawk the Slayer was dirt cheap in comparison. You'd be hard pressed to find a poorer relation in a fucking Dickens novel. It was conceived of by Terry Marcel and Harry Robertson. Both men collaborated on the screenplay, whilst Marcel directed. Robertson produced the film and wrote the score. There are problems associated with Marcel and Robertson. Marcel had no directing or writing skills. Robertson was primarily a composer who worked a lot with Hammer in the early 70s and is responsible for the shockingly discordant and despair-inducing Strangelove track in Lust for a Vampire. In common with Marcel, he couldn't formulate a script for shit. The soundtrack Robertson composed was a grisly and incongruous combination of Ennio Morricone in electric guitar mode and the disco doodling of a Giorgio Moroder tribute act recovering from a bout of viral meningitis. Cinematography was by Paul Beeson, a man who had previously worked on 7 live-action movies for Disney and curated some beautifully crafted visuals for the Michael Caine version of Kidnapped in 1971. Just before working on Hawk, someone must have pepper sprayed the poor bastard. It was shot in 6 weeks, mostly on location in the wilds of Buckinghamshire. To say expectations should be relegated to the lower end of the anticipatory spectrum is something of an understatement, because whatever you're expecting, if you haven't already seen it, you have no idea, Pilgrim, which is where I come in, to give you some idea. The cast includes one bona fide Hollywood legend, Jack Palance, and one bona fide Hollywood nobody, John Terry. Who? He went on to play Felix Leiter to Timothy Dalton's Bond in The Living Daylights, and someone or other, a soldier, seemed a safe bet in Full Metal Jacket. As for the rest, it's a game of spot the British character actor with time on their hands that day and scratching for enough pocket change to buy a bag of chips and a battered Savoy to take home for their tea. Hawk the Slayer is set nowhere specific. Geographically and historically, the where and when is never revealed to us. One can assume it's a medieval time and place, judging by the clothing, environments and technology. Lack of technology, that is. The story revolves around the conflict between two brothers. Voltan, Jack Palance, the elder of the two, is an evil git with a mutilated face, channeling and being manipulated by dark forces. Hawk, John Terry, the younger, is a good guy with chiseled features and a broodingly heroic but terminally frozen face. Seeking the power which he believes to be his rightful inheritance, Voltan mortally wounds his father when he proves reluctant to hand it over. When Hawk turns up, the dying daddy bestows the power of the last elven mind stone upon him, which gives him control of the great sword. Hawk can control it with his mind. Considering how mindless he appears to be, this may be cause for concern. Voltan has also inadvertently killed his ex, Eliane Catriona McCall, who got betrothed to Hawk after dumping Voltan. Before she bites the big dirt sandwich, she has enough forethought to plunge a burning torch into Voltan's face, scarring him hideously. This limits his chances of getting a date on Tinder and leaves him with persistent neuralgia. He makes frequent visits to a magician who blasts his clock with some neon rays to ease his agony. Your face will not pain you for a while, he tells Voltan. Yeah, but where does that leave the rest of us? This is the standard of dialogue you can expect, the quality of which is disappointingly consistent throughout. Further proof evidenced by Eliane's insightful comment on Voltan's mental state. His mind has turned in on itself. Freud could not have put it better. Do not expect what you hear to improve any, because it fucking doesn't. Voltan takes to terrorizing and plundering the countryside with his army of cutthroat mercenaries and adopted son Drogo, Shane Bryant. I imagine the adoption agencies at the time were none too picky when it came to the suitability of adoptive parents. Not much different to now, really, then. Voltan wouldn't be an ideal first choice to bring up a kid, although modern social services might well beg to differ. Occupation?
Evil, butchering despot, killer of men, women and children. Patricide and murder of old girlfriends a speciality.
You sound lovely. The perfect role model for little Drogo. Escaping from a village, Voltan and his crew of just ravaged, crossbow-wielding Ranulph W. Morgan Shepherd reaches an abbey, St. Polystyrene's, where the nuns, under the kindly abbess, Annette Crosby, tend his wounds. They must amputate his hand, but later he will compensate by adding auto-fire to his crossbow. It spits out bolts like machine gun bullets. Voltan hits the abbey and kidnaps the abbess, demanding a ransom in gold from the church, or the abbess gets it. Ranulph goes to find the High Abbot, Harry Andrews, who in turn advises him to seek out the warrior known as Hawk. Hawk is busy riding his horse in slow motion through forests and puddles of dirty rainwater. This goes on forever. He rescues the sorceress, Patricia Quinn, from getting burned by two mentally deficient thugs. Then he rescues Ranulph, who two blackguards have captured, robbed and roped to a tree for target practice. The sorceress, happy to help, teleports Hawk around the world to recruit some of his old comrades to the cause. There's balding Peter O'Farrell, who ironically has a full head of hair despite his name. He's a dwarf with a whip, who is just about to be sacrificed by a religious cult led by Patrick McGee. No one knows why. Hawk rescues him, just as well as he's the last dwarf and not to be sneezed at. Next he rescues Crow, an elf, and Crackshot Archer, who is the last elf evidently. Then Gort, a giant, played by Bernard Bresslaw. They don't say it, but presumably he's the last giant. How long before we get to the last straw? Not far off. We're all set for...
An epic battle between good and evil, brother against brother, mano a mano in a cataclysmic showdown that will shake the very foundations of the known universe with shock, spectacle, awe and wonder.
Are we not? Well, no, not exactly. Hollywood legend Jack Palance gives the worst performance I've ever seen him give. He's lost the plot. Spitting, seething, ranting, snarling, shouting, gesticulating, and that's just to order a Pinot Grigio in a medieval wine bar. The rest of the time he's absolutely off the fucking chart insane, cranked up to 11 and possibly on occasion beyond. There's a scene in which he threatens an innkeeper, Roy Kinnear, that is the funniest thing in the film. Kinnear's exaggerated eye-rolling pantomime fear and dread is an inadequate response to the sheer explosion of thespian excess and madness being perpetrated before him. But there's nothing else he can do. How can you react to this? How does anyone react to what Palance is doing here? Kinnear must have been praying for a return to the good old days when he only had to contend with Ollie Reed kicking off. John Terry is another performance extreme, right down at the other end of the performance crapometer. His range? Well, he doesn't have one. Here I'll provide you with some visual examples of how he expresses a cornucopia of emotions in this film. His versatility has no beginning. They might as well have given the title role to a tree. In comparison, Arnie in Conan the Barbarian is like Olivier playing Hamlet at the Old Vic. John Terry might be the most moribund and plankton-like sword and sorcery hero ever to grace the screen. For the narrative themes and the action played out within them, we bear witness to a cobbled together and somewhat uneasy coalition of Robert E. Howard sword and sorcery mythos and Sergio Leone spaghetti western schematics. Confrontations involve protracted close-ups of Hawk's face and eyes, then those of his antagonists, then Hawk standing still, then the antagonist standing still, then Hawk's face and rinse and repeat, until someone eventually springs into action. All the while, Robertson's spaghetti disco music cavorts about in the background with all the fluidity and grace of Donna Summer in Doc Martens and calipers. Then there are the special effects, dear God. Actually, remove the word special from this equation. There is nothing special about them. Most amdram amateur theatre techs would be able to produce more convincing stuff. Doctor Who of the 70s had more visual credibility. In fact, the Hammer films of 20 plus years previously deliver more realistic matte backdrops and set design. The crowning glory of the final battle in the Abbey sees a guard covered in turquoise silly string, an asbestos snowstorm powered by a wind machine, and a bunch of glowing multicoloured fluorescent ping pong balls chucked around the cardboard set with careless abandon. In the school play Maelstrom, Hawk and the gang kick the shit out of Alton's guys, aided and abetted by the sort of rapid and focused cutting that could only have been provided by an editor with delirium tremens or advanced Parkinson's. If all that I've said so far leads you to believe it isn't much good, then you'd be right. It isn't much good. In trying to be fair, and although a low budget isn't really the best excuse for making a bad film, it did have a low budget. The core concept was aiming higher than the budget would allow for. For this type of film, you need halfway decent resources. Resources that would be financially compatible with what the makers wanted to show on screen. Now here, more creatively competent individuals might have strategized better and scaled their ideas down, concentrating more on mood, atmosphere and drama, but I don't think they had those talents to exploit. There's a journey through a dangerous toxic forest early on that shouldn't have been attempted. It is so poorly realised and shot, it makes that episode of The Muppet Show with Alice Cooper in it look like the very pinnacle of visual fantasy artistry. It's obvious that the actors received little direction. Palance, who needed skilled directing to rein in his excesses, behaves as if he was given the brief to project as evil and nasty as possible and then allowed to just run riot with it and do whatever he felt like doing. Terry probably got told to look moody and intense, and the needle got stuck in that groove for the duration. As for the remainder of the cast, they're mostly character actors who speak their lines, pick up their pitifully small checks at close of play, and fuck off home or onto the next job on the list. Like, what's it to them? Marcel later announced a planned sequel in 1982, Hawk the Destroyer, but it never happened. Quelle surprise. In 2015, another proposed sequel, Hawk the Hunter, was reported to be in development. It's since been postponed indefinitely. In 2022, Marcel announced plans for a TV series of Hawk the Destroyer. Nothing more thus far, but credit to the guy for perseverance. The same year, a comic book version of Hawk the Slayer was published, and from what I've seen, in terms of tone and imagery, it hints at a more coherent vision of what the original film could have been. If nothing else, Hawk the Slayer has achieved some cult status over the years, there is still some interest in it, and the basic concept did have something approaching potential at heart. There are fans and nostalgia jockeys out there like there are for most things, but if you like sword and sorcery flicks, there are better options available, and Hawk the Slayer is unlikely to be anyone's first port of call. In summation, for what it's worth, the execution of the original movie failed in nearly all aspects, making it a piece of disastrous, laughable junk. If you're going to force yourself to sit through it, you may well require some chemical support. Your poison of choice. Mine was alcohol, and that's what got me to this point. If anyone expects me to experience it again, clean and sober, best kill me now. I ain't doing it. Thanks for your time and attention. As always, it is appreciated. If you fancy a bit more involvement, please feel free to hit the like or didn't like buttons, post a comment, subscribe to the channel, punch the super thanks button, or even visit my Patreon page for some exclusive and early access stuff. Meanwhile, all I can tell you is I will return with something else, soon as I have something else to return with. Take care, pilgrims.
And now, preview time.
Coming soon to a movie theatre near you, Robin Asquith is Pork the Shagger, also starring Diana Dawes as Cliteria, Linda Hayden as Vigerus, and guest starring Arthur Askey as the giant Burke. Pork the Shagger. He puts the sauce in sword and sorcery, and his pork sword in just about anything. Certificate PG. Pure garbage.